I'm old enough to remember when America hated Nazis. Do you remember that? Somebody needs to remind the Republican Party, because once again, Donald Trump publicly regurgitated literal Nazi talking points at a recent MAGA rally. And Republican elected officials and right-wing commentators are either indifferent or worse, supportive, as their cult leader openly, proudly, and increasingly displays his anti-American fascism. This is not a drill, and the clock is ticking. But before we unpack all that, if you haven't yet, please hit that like, subscribe, and the alert bell. All right, folks, I have several clips to play, and I know that many in my audience can't stand videos about Trump. They can't stand to hear his voice. They can't stand to hear his face. But he's not going anywhere. He is the leader of the Republican Party. He's the current favorite to win the presidential election, even over President Biden. He is a sincere and genuine threat to this country, and we have to talk about it. This is a clip from a recent rally in New Hampshire in which Donald Trump is referring to immigrants, okay? We'll play the clip and unpack it together.
Country, when they do that, we got a lot of work to do. They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world, not just in South America, not just the 3 or 4 countries that we think about, but all over the world. They're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia, all over the world. They're pouring into our country. Nobody's even looking at them. They just come in. The crime is going to be tremendous. The terrorism is going to be, and then we built.
So a couple of things. Crime has gone down in 2023. I know Trump and Trumpists don't care about facts, but those are the facts, whether you like it or not. And number two, we have no evidence whatsoever that immigrants in this country are going to increase the threat of terrorism. I know right-wingers and I know Republican elected officials and right-wing commentators on Fox News. They're so thirsty for the thought of an undocumented migrant or an immigrant of any legal status committing a terrorist attack in this country. But we have no evidence that the statistics increase. Okay, we need to take terrorism seriously. But this idea that immigrants are a unique cultural or political threat to this country is absolutely despicable. Not only is it despicable, it's an actual literal Nazi talking point. Mein Kampf, which is Hitler's autobiography, he used that phrase which Trump used about poisoning the blood, and other phrases very similar, multiple times in multiple passages, not just in Mein Kampf, but also speeches. We'll set that aside for the moment. Rolling Stone talks about it in the aftermath of Trump's speech. They say, in Mein Kampf, there are several passages where Hitler used the words poison and blood when attacking those he claimed to threaten the purity of the Aryan race. In one of the many instances Hitler referenced those words in Mein Kampf, he wrote of the Jews, he poisons the blood of others, but preserves his own blood unadulterated. Okay, folks, again, this is not hyperbole. It's not, an exaggeration. Trump is literally regurgitating the words of Adolf Hitler to try to rally up his base. That's insane. It's indefensible. It is eminently, objectively disqualifying from a moral perspective in this country for high office. And yet, Trump commands the biggest cult in the history of this country, and yet it doesn't seem like his polls are suffering as a result. Now, historian Ruth Ben Gotti talked about this recently on CNN, and this is what she had to say.
This is fascist rhetoric. The worries about polluting the blood of the superior race go as a standard of Nazism. It's not just the Nazis, it's also fascists in Italy. Mussolini literally talked about killing rats, to go back to Trump's use of vermin in an earlier speech. He talked about killing rats who were bringing infectious diseases and communism into Italy.
So it's not just Hitler, it's also Benito Mussolini, who is his fascism predated Hitler's, and he was the dictator of Italy during the Second World War. We'll come back to Mussolini in a minute because there are also parallels between Trump and Mussolini. In response, the White House said, echoing the grotesque rhetoric of fascists and violent white supremacists and threatening to oppress those who disagree with the government are dangerous attacks on the dignity and rights of all Americans, on our democracy and public safety. White House spokesperson Andrew Bates said in a statement to Media Sunday on Trump's comments. Okay, we definitely need to be hearing more of that. Now, I mentioned in the intro that, it's bad enough that someone as powerful and influential and prominent as Donald Trump is saying these terrible things, but also the permissive structure in America's right wing, from Republican elected officials and right wing commentators. It's indefensible, and it makes him, Trump, who's already a threat, even more dangerous with his stupidity and his bigotry and his xenophobia and his fascism, because they're not going to try to check him. Lindsey Graham, Republican senator from South Carolina, said he couldn't care. Well, he said when asked about Trump's rhetoric, he says, we're talking about language. I could care less what language people use as long as we get it right. Now, he should have said, I couldn't care less. So bad on Lindsey Graham. But Lindsey Graham's indifferent. Donald Trump can say whatever he wants as long as he, quote unquote, does it right or gets it right. I don't know what that means or what evidence he has of Donald Trump ever getting anything right. But it's not just Lindsey Graham. It's not just Republican elected officials. Power takes many forms. Also right-wing commentators like on Fox News, for example, the most popular and prominent news source in the mainstream media. There are multiple instances of them just trying to excuse it or seeming to support it. And we're going to play some of those clips.
There's other things going on, too, is that President over the weekend gave had a speech, huge rally, unbelievable crowd in New Hampshire. They didn't like his rhetoric. He was talking about the border. He was talking about people coming from other countries, coming from prisons. And they wanted to focus all the Sunday shows, Lawrence, on the word he used, poison. He was just trying to say, we want to keep America, America. We want to build up the border and find out who's coming in and out. And they tried to say that this language was the problem. And then you look at what Jen Psaki was saying over the weekend. She's saying the goal now is to make people fearful that Trump could win. To see these polls, Lawrence, and say he could be back.
So, and then he goes to say it's actually a cynical political maneuver. That was Brian Kilmeade. A cynical political maneuver of the left. Well, no, Donald Trump actually said those words, and words do matter. My God, this is the network that freaked out about Obama's tan suit. So apparently the color of a suit matters, not words from a proto-fascist like Trump, who is very powerful and influential. So it's actions that matter, and also the color of suits. This news network has absolutely no standard whatsoever. They're jokes. They would be effortlessly crushed in any debate on the subject for their hypocrisy. But it just doesn't stop at that clip either.
Okay, and the reason I talk about those two stories at the same time, because one, every time we've done this over and over. Donald Trump uses words, and those words force this gigantic conversation about what means underneath the words in the future of our country. And then on the other hand, we've got legit actions. And I get it; it's a Senate aide. But it's things that actually happened.
So again, people on Fox personalities are trying to downplay Trump's words. Oh, they're just words. Sure, they're coming from an extremely powerful person with a permissive political structure. Sure, we have reason to believe that he would try to aggressively pursue such things. And also, why would we even give him the chance? Why would we just give him the benefit of the doubt? Would Fox News ever give the benefit of a doubt to a Democrat ever saying stuff like that? Probably not, right? And of course, here what they're referencing is they're comparing Trump's rhetoric to a story that recently broke about a political staffer having sex with somebody in a Senate room, okay, which is obviously scandalous. There's potential prosecution involved. But in the grand scheme of things, somebody having consensual sex in an inappropriate place for which they will suffer professional and perhaps legal consequences is nowhere near as dangerous as somebody who was a president and may yet be president again, become the most powerful person in the world, articulating this idea that immigrants, that he said, Trump said it, he said Asian immigrants, African immigrants, South American immigrants are poisoning the blood of America. That is infinitely worse than a sex scandal and a sex story. Just there's no contest whatsoever. But again, they'll do anything to grade Trump on a curve. Got some more clips for you. This is a former, I believe, advisor to Mike Pence.
The left continues to attack him for something outrageous, he says, but it continues to drive the issue back to border security, which is what he wants to be talking about. He has a decisive lead on border security over Joe Biden, just like he does on the economy, just like he does on international affairs. And so, yeah, he says something outlandish. They attack what he said rhetorically. But if you come back to the root of the issue, it's where a lot of the American people agree with him on.
Well, if a lot of the American people agree with Trump on border issues, then why does he have to quote Hitler? What talk does he need? If he's got the winning majority on his side on this particular issue, what conversations need to be had and what does it gain by quoting Hitler? The guy in question before the clip started, he said he didn't think that it was likely that Donald Trump ever even read Mein Kampf. So, I mean, my God, guys, what are you talking about? Except according to his deceased ex-wife, Ivana Trump, who presumably knows Donald Trump or knew Donald Trump infinitely better than anybody else on that panel, Trump kept Hitler speeches in a cabinet by his bed. I agree that Donald Trump is not particularly literate. He's a profoundly stupid and ignorant man. But based on reporting, the few times he's dabbled in history, he's sampled quite a bit of Hitler, it seems. Now, in response to this, Joe Scarborough, who is host of Morning Joe, is a Republican. As a matter of fact, was a Republican congressperson during the Clinton administration. This is what he had to say about Fox News and other right-wing commentators making excuses or complaining about how the media was covering this.
We always get that question, why do you give him attention? Actually, this cannot be normalized. And he is the Republican frontrunner. He is so far the Republicans' choice.
Yeah. Well, not only, it's getting more explicit. It's getting worse. I am still shocked by the clowns who claim to be media critics out there. Just absolute clowns that attack the media for reporting this. And sometimes you just don't get it. You don't understand his connection with the audience. You just have to understand better. You're actually helping him by focusing on, saying he's fascist. John Meacham.
That is something you hear quite a bit. You certainly hear it from right-wingers, but you even hear it from, other like centrist and liberal commentators as well. And listen, it is a judgment call, right? Because there is this idea that no publicity is bad publicity. There's no such thing as bad publicity. There's some truth to that. And certainly Trump is cunning enough to try to weaponize bad publicity in his favor. And certainly he commands a cultish devotion from the Republican base who are completely indifferent. Trump famously said he could walk out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and not lose a single vote. That was less a boast than it was a prophecy, right? It's becoming increasingly true. It's a cultish devotion on the right to Trump that the left just simply doesn't have to anybody, certainly not liberals or the Democratic bloc in general. Now, earlier, Ruth Ben Gotti was talking about, Ruth Ben Gotti was talking about comparisons between Trump and Mussolini. And I want to play just a couple of clips here from Mehdi Hasan's most recent show, in which he also identifies the parallels, and also with respect to how the media and we on the left should cover these issues.
Benito Mussolini was the original fascist, Il Duce, ruling Italy from 1922 to 1943, more than 20 years. And during that time, he didn't exactly hide his authoritarian agenda. As head of a coalition government back in the 1920s, he even said, quote, "I must take upon myself the task of governing the Italian nation from 10 to 15 years longer. It is necessary. My successor is not yet born." And at the time, many may have thought the Italian leader was, joking. But the joke was on them, because that's exactly what he did. The joke was also on the Brits and the Americans, who for years lampooned Mussolini in comic books and cartoons as a clown and a buffoon. That was their approach to the Italian fascist dictator in the making. He's joking, or he is a joke. Well, how did that work out for Italy and Europe during World War II?
100%. We'll talk about the thread that we have to navigate, or the threads we have to needle, with respect to how we depict Trump. But one last clip I want to play here again between Mehdi Hasan and Ruth Ben Gotti again.
Ruth, you literally wrote the book on Mussolini. Do you, like me, see these pretty obvious comparisons with people just dismissing the threat from Trump like they did with Il Duce?
Absolutely. And by the way, Mussolini declared dictatorship in 1925 to escape prosecution, because he was under investigation for having ordered the murder of his chief political rival, a socialist, and it looked like he was going to go down. And so he took the leap and declared dictatorship. So there are many, many similarities. Now, those Republicans you interviewed they seemed a bit nervous, but they reminded me, because you have to choose your words very carefully. There's a party line now with the Republican Party, just like in an authoritarian state. But they reminded me of the first hour enablers of these dictators who then get cast aside. Some of them end up in prison.
So listen, some very ominous words there from Ruth Ben Gotti, again, a political historian who, yes, quite literally wrote the book on Mussolini as well as other various authoritarians. It's a book called Strong Men. I definitely recommend you check it out. So here's the thing. The parallels are there. People can deny that the parallels were there. And again, they would lose every debate. They would lose every argument, which is why they say it from the safety of the Fox propaganda network. Oh, Trump and Hitler, there's nothing there to see. And yet historians, political scientists, experts, people who understand this stuff intimately, as a matter of fact, many of them, like Donald Trump's ex-wife and people who knew Trump personally, who worked for him, say that the fascist parallels are there, that Donald Trump is a fascist. He is a fascist. It's not a matter of opinion. It's simply a fact. And when Trump says things like immigrants poison the blood of our country, that's not something that we should sweep under the rug and normalize. We shouldn't normalize or sweep under the rug any of it, but certainly not that. When somebody tells you who they are, believe them. And Donald Trump hasn't told us once, but twice, and 3 or 4 other times, a gazillion times, dozens of times. And this idea that, well, he really didn't govern like a fascist in round 1, ergo he can't govern like a fascist in round 2, is a profoundly stupid argument. It's dumb. Donald Trump is publicly telling, he's said it in interviews. He says, listen, I was thwarted, I was undermined, I was challenged, I was constrained by people in round 1, in the first administration. He says he acknowledges that. And so he's going to do things differently in round 2. So you can't use that argument. Donald Trump is saying, I know what happened in round 1. Round 1's not going to happen again because I'm not going to be constrained this time around. And he's more pissed and vengeful and deranged than he's ever been. The fact of the matter is, it has happened in other republics in the past. There's no reason to believe that it couldn't happen here. My God, people, if you're watching and you're skeptical about the threat Trump poses, our founding fathers, if you're a conservative or you're a centrist and you're watching, you just love the founding fathers, their wisdom. It animates you. They were worried about the threat of a fascist or what they would later be understood as a fascist, basically an authoritarian ruler who would seize power. Yes, even the founding fathers feared that was absolutely freaking possible in the United States of America, even with checks and balances, even with separation of powers. These things are not divinely created. They're not divinely enforced. We are a country of people, flawed people, whose systems and institutions have to be governed by flawed people in good faith. It is absolutely a place where systems can be abused and power can be seized. George Washington, in his farewell address, President Washington warned the country that such a demagogue might come. So it absolutely could happen here. Trump is signaling that it will happen here. He is evoking the worst fascists and authoritarians in history. So we have to take it seriously, which is why no matter who the Democratic nominee is, if you are a responsible, civic-minded, eligible voter in November 2024, I would argue you are morally obligated to vote blue no matter who. If you agree or disagree, either way, let me know what you think in the comments.